Today is July 14th, 2024. The conflict in Ukraine continues to grind on, and there are growing numbers of articles across the Western media admitting to just how badly this conflict is going for Ukraine and also for its Western sponsors. So I want to get into all of that, but before we do that, let's take a look at the situation on the ground. This is via liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian live map, so please keep that in mind while we look at it. As you can see, all of this in red is territory held by Russia. And as we can see all along the line of contact, fighting continues. When you see these red rifle icons, this is the pro-Ukrainian map admitting Russian forces are on the move. They are extending beyond territory this map acknowledges is held by Russia. They are moving forward into Ukrainian-held territory. We could see all of these areas expanding day by day, week by week. We can remember not that long ago, Avdiivka was the front. Now look at where the front is, and look, it continues to expand westward, and that is the same situation here. Just west of Bakhmut in Chasiv Yar, Russian forces are well underway of taking Chasiv Yar, and of course all along the line of contact up to the border between Ukraine and Russia, and of course here in Kharkov, Russian forces continue to hold this territory. We hear conflicting reports of Russian advances in this area and other claims by pro-Ukrainian sources that the line has stabilized. Not that Ukraine is pushing Russian forces back. They seem unable to do that. They won't even claim that they're doing that. What they're claiming is that they've stabilized this front. But again, as I've explained many times before, this front was opened up specifically to overstretch Ukrainian forces. Because they shifted forces to Kharkov, they're unable to protect other areas like Chasiv Yar. And I've explained how even Ukrainian officials have admitted that this is their dilemma. This is a strategic crisis Ukraine faces and have no solution for it, and it will only get worse as the days, weeks, and months go by. This is a war of attrition. People are mistaking Russia's slow progress for no progress at all. They're not trying to make territorial progress. They are making attritional progress. They are grinding down Ukraine's forces. They are also grinding down the level of support the West is able to provide Ukraine. So let's get into all of that. First, I want to talk about this video here from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. This is titled "The State of Russia's Defense Industry After 2 Years of War and Sanctions." This was published June 25th, 2024. I'm going to play you a couple of clips that I put together, edited together, of one of these CSIS experts talking. These are US government arms industry funded think tanks. These are the unelected policymakers shaping US policy. It is simply rubber stamped by Washington, and it is sold to the American public by the media. So this is what they are admitting.
The Russians, from the start of the war and continuously, have been more effective at targeting defense industrial sites than many other aspects of their strike campaign. So they've gone after large factories, they've gone down to medium level factories and those that supply them, and they hit them with missiles, to even like little individual workshops now. So it's just it's very dangerous. There is no sanctuary in Ukraine. If Russia detects a drone manufacturing organization and has the resources and the targeting lock on it, they have the ability to do it. Russia has a functional defense industrial base, and the Russians look out at what is working on the Ukrainian side and they say, I want that. And then they can bring it home faster and scale it up and then kind of flip it around. The biggest challenge that I see right now is the Russian ISR, their intelligence reconnaissance strike, loop, is getting really, really tight, and using drones, and then having the ability to put like an SS-26 SRBM or an Iskander on it within minutes.
These are advanced missiles.
These are they're ballistic, so they're quick. They are targeting anything from helicopters that are fueling up. They're able to target ATACMS. They're targeting Patriot. I mean, these are high-value targets that they keep trying to go after and are succeeding increasingly.
So that targeting issue, which we saw at the beginning of the campaign, where it was like, oh, the Russians can't, they may see a target, but they can't strike the target as fast as we could, for instance.
Yes.
Now they've shrunk that and are becoming
They've shrunk it, and Sam is here as the expert on this, but the Zala and the Orlan, they're really important to that. Russia continuously adapts its EW cycle. And also, I suspect, and others suspect, that they are somehow receiving commercial satellite imagery either provided to them from China or they're getting it through shell companies from the West. And the Ukrainians have noted this too, where a site will be imaged and then a couple days later it's got a Russian missile on it. And so how have they created shell companies essentially to get that strategic ISR problem or operational depth fixed? They have.
They're talking about Russia's ability to not just hit large factories, but smaller factories, suppliers, and even these distributed networks making drones, this crowdsourced drone production that we have been hearing about in the Western media over the last 2 years. Plus, we are also hearing about Russia's improved intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR. Their capability to find targets and strike them has not just increased in terms of the quantity of strikes, but also the speed at which this whole process takes place, the speed at which a target is found and a missile is brought down upon it. They're admitting that this is costing Ukraine scarce HIMARS launchers, Patriot missile systems. We're hearing about Patriot missile systems being sent to Ukraine. In a previous update, I talked about how they are stringing together spare parts from different systems, putting it together to make a whole battery because they are now out of batteries, whole batteries to transfer over to Ukraine. This is how desperate it's getting. I'm going to talk about the US sending an additional US Patriot battery, but these batteries are barely replacing Ukraine's losses, let alone building a critical mass of air defense capabilities. And again, it all comes down to the interceptors themselves. Not nearly enough are produced for these systems to launch, even if Ukraine had double the number, which is what they have requested, but which they will never get. So let's actually take a look at this. This was the most recent US security assistance package to Ukraine. This is from July 11th. So I covered the one previous to this one, and I explained how they're going to be very short and they're going to have a lot of items that are repeated in each package because they are now drawing from monthly production numbers because their stockpiles are depleted, and the production each month of these weapons and of this ammunition is not nearly sufficient for Ukraine's requirements. And I will get into that. So let's go down the list item by item, as I have been doing over the duration of this conflict. One Patriot battery. So we just heard from CSIS how Russia is increasingly able to find these air defense systems, target and destroy them. So you're sending one Patriot battery. Germany is sending one Patriot battery. Maybe one or two other countries in Europe are sending one Patriot battery each, maybe. Are they even replacing the ones that Ukraine has lost? Are they building a critical mass of air defense capabilities? The answer is no. Next on the list is munitions for National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, NASAMS. And again, I talked about a previous article in the Western media talking about how not just Patriot missile interceptors are going to be coming straight from monthly production and going to Ukraine, but also missiles for NASAMS. And they're going to have to divert missiles that were supposed to go to other international customers. They will be put on a waiting list, and the missiles that were supposed to go to them are now going to be diverted to Ukraine, but it will not be enough. This is an act of desperation, and it still will not address the critical shortage Ukraine faces in terms of air defense capabilities. Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. The Stinger is a man-portable air defense system. You can use these missiles in the Avenger system, a vehicle-mounted system. These are being drawn from monthly production. We remember in the very beginning, hundreds, if not thousands of these missiles and systems were sent to Ukraine. Stockpiles were exhausted. Now they're drawing from monthly production. What is the monthly production of Stinger missiles? I was even shocked by how low this number is. This is from Jane's, which is a very reputable Western military publication. Stinger missile production to rise 50% by 2025, US Army says. But what is the current level of production, and what does it mean to double it? The US Army expects to increase production of Stinger missiles to 60 a month by 2025, 50% from the current rate, according to a spokesperson for the service's Program Executive Officer, Missiles and Space. That means the current production of Stinger missiles every single month is 30 missiles. 30 missiles. There are more units in Ukraine that would require a Stinger missile system than they have missiles to give just one to each one of these units. That is how few they have. That is why we're watching videos of Russian drones flying over critical military targets in Ukraine, and Ukrainians have no ability to shoot these drones down. They can see them, they can hear them, they can do nothing about them because they're out of systems like Stinger, because the Stinger is not just to shoot down low-flying manned warplanes or attack helicopters. They're also meant to shoot down these reconnaissance drones that Russia is using to such great effect. 30 missiles is obviously far too few, almost a negligible number of missiles per month. 60, doubling it to 60 is also meaningless. Even if it was 100 missiles a month, that would be far too few. You can see the rate of production expansion in the United States is entirely insufficient. It will take years and years and years, and that's only if they make the decision to seriously expand production beyond 60 missiles a month by 2025. Next on the list, ammunition for high mobility artillery rocket system HIMARS. Again, we just heard from CSIS that these HIMARS platforms are being targeted with increasing frequency. And again, the rockets themselves are not manufactured in large enough quantities to give an endless supply to Ukraine. You have to remember that this is a weapon system that the collective West also has in their arsenal. They need these missiles for training. They also need these missiles to build up their own stockpiles. 155 millimeter and 105 millimeter artillery rounds. They're sending 105 millimeter artillery rounds because they don't have enough 155 millimeter artillery rounds. I suspect they don't have enough 105 millimeter artillery rounds either. I will talk about Western production of artillery shells here in just a minute. I've exhaustively talked about this. There's a new article that suggests the projections of production expansion have been overestimated. The number of rounds that Europe in particular is making is far fewer than what they had claimed. Tube-launched, optically tracked, wire-guided equipment and missiles. This is the TOW anti-tank missile. They also have Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems on this list. I've talked about how these are also being drawn from monthly production, which again is very small. When you consider that all of these systems together have a 19% hit rate, not kill rate, just a 19% hit rate, that means that Ukraine is not getting enough missiles to destroy the amount of Russian armor that is produced month to month by Russia. Then we also have small arms ammunition, demolitions, munitions, spare parts maintenance, and other equipment. So this is all additional equipment that is absolutely essential for a military to have. Russia almost certainly has more of all of this at their disposal. They also have more manpower to use all of this than Ukraine does. I'll be getting into the severe manpower crisis Ukraine faces, again, as admitted by the Western media. It is all coming out now. Every week, the admissions become more and more realistic, I guess we could say. Let's stick with weapons for now. Let's talk about these high-tech, precision-guided weapons the US was going to send to Ukraine that were going to be game changers. We have this article from the Wall Street Journal. High-tech American weapons work against Russia until they don't. Moscow is learning how to defeat Western precision munitions in Ukraine. Now this article kind of consolidates all of the piecemeal admissions the Western media has made over the last year and a half now of the various GPS-guided weapons, precision-guided weapons the US and other US allies have sent to Ukraine. They were sent with high hopes that they would completely turn the tables on Russia, and what happened instead was that Russia was able to counter them. So now we have a whole article summarizing this process. It says Western military doctrine has long relied on a belief that precision can defeat mass, meaning that well-targeted strikes can cripple a more numerous enemy, reducing the need for massive expenditure on troops, tanks, and artillery. Well, that was the theory. It is a theory that has been proven completely false. Russia and China have now proven that you can have a military that consists of both mass and also precision. They have both. The United States has only precision, small amounts of precision, guided weapons. They lack the mass of troops, armor, artillery. Russia and China not only have huge amounts of infantry, armor, artillery, they have precision-guided weapons. They also have much more in terms of precision-guided weapons than the United States has. They have more. They're able to produce more cruise missiles, more ballistic missiles, more air defense systems, more electronic warfare systems. All of these systems that are high-tech, precision weapons or countermeasures to them, they can be produced in vaster quantities by Russia and China. And for all of the reasons that I've consistently explained regarding the Western profit-driven system and the purpose-driven system that Russia and China depend on for their defense industry. The article admits we have probably made some bad assumptions because over the last 20 years, we were launching precision weapons against people that could not do anything about it. And this was retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, a former commander of the US Army in Europe. Now we are doing it against a peer opponent, and Russia and China have these capabilities. Yes, they have these capabilities. They also have conventional mass. They have both. And this is retired General Ben Hodges admitting this. If he is admitting this, that tells you something about how bad this really all is. Then the article tries to claim, well, these weapons that are being provided to Ukraine are older weapons, which is why Russia has success in defeating them. If it was the US military using their latest weapons, this wouldn't be happening. But in reality, a lot of these weapons that the US is sending Ukraine are their newest weapons. I just told you, I showed you the Department of Defense's list of what they are sending Ukraine. This is coming off their current production lines. Those weapons are coming off their current production lines and going straight to Ukraine. We remember a lot of the drones that I've talked about over the last 2+ years that the US sent to Ukraine were bleeding edge technology in the US. Drones that the US military didn't even get yet, that they were supposed to get, that these were accelerated and sent to Ukraine. They simply did not work. Russia was able to counter them. They were able to overwhelm them. They were able to counter with their own capabilities that were not just better in terms of quality, but greater in quantity. The article continues. It says, one of the lessons learned in Ukraine is about the continuing importance of old school unguided artillery shells, the manufacturing of which is only now beginning to pick up in the US and Europe after decades of decline. This is according to some other lieutenant general, the permanent secretary of Finland's defense ministry. They are immune to any type of jamming, and they will go to target regardless of what type of electronic warfare capability there may be, he said. But again, even in this, Russia holds a vast advantage, and they will well into the foreseeable future. So why don't we talk about why that is? Why they have this vast advantage in terms of not just precision-guided weapons and also the means of countering precision-guided weapons, but also a huge advantage in conventional weapons like artillery shells. This is an article from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. This is US government-funded media. EU shell production capacity supplies to Ukraine fall far short of promises. This is something that I have avoided talking about. I always give the collective West benefit of the doubt. That is how I do my analysis. I assume the worst case scenario, the best case scenario for the collective West, the worst case scenario for Russia. I gave them the benefit of the doubt, and these numbers that they were citing were still less than what they themselves admit Russia is producing year to year in terms of artillery shells. Alexander Mikuras of the Duran has been talking about this, though. In many of his video updates, he was talking about how there's no way they're reaching these numbers that they're citing. Now it turns out he was absolutely right. They are admitting that this is not the case. So let's read a little bit about this. In March, the European Commission said that thanks to its measures, European annual production capacity for 155mm shells had reached 1 million a month earlier. 3 months later in June, the European Commissioner for the Internal Market said that the EU producers would reach an annual capacity of 1.7 million 155mm shells by the end of this year, and that capacity would continue to grow. However, according to a high-ranking European arms industry source, the current capacity is about 1/3 of this. That's around 550,000 rounds per year, or about 45,800 rounds a month, or about 1,500 shells per day that are available to send to Ukraine. Literally every single one of these shells was sent to Ukraine. Now, Ukraine, just to maintain its disadvantage against Russia in terms of artillery, needs 6,000 rounds a day. This is 1,500 rounds a day. If we add this admitted European production number to what the United States claims they will be making next year, they claim by next year they will be making 100,000 shells per month. Which again, if Europe was lying about this, is the US telling the truth about their production numbers? Let's just give them benefit of the doubt and say, yes, they will be making 100,000 shells a month next year, plus 46,000 shells per month by Europe every single month. That would mean there's about 1.7 million rounds a year, which is still less than 4,700 rounds per day for Ukraine. Again, if every single shell is sent directly to Ukraine, the US, Europe forego sending shells to their own military units for training or for replenishing their own stockpiles. If every single shell was sent to Ukraine, it would still only be 4,700 a day. Again, far less than the 6,000 they need just to maintain their disadvantage they have with Russia. And that was 2022, 2023. I think the number of shells that they're getting right now, or that they have available and they are using per day, is somewhere around 2,000. I guess 4,700 is an improvement over 2,000, but it still doesn't reach their high mark of 6,000 per day. And again, this 1.7 million, again, if the US is able to expand production to 100,000 shells every month next year, 1.7 million rounds per year between US and European production combined is still much lower than what they admit Russian production is right now. Again, this is CNN. Russia producing 3 times more artillery shells than US and Europe for Ukraine. And they say the number is 3 million a year. 3 million shells. Russia is making 3 million shells a year. So you can see, even after 2 or 3 years of expanding production, the collective West will still not reach what Russia is producing right now. And Russia is only going to continue expanding its own production. Here is another article. Like I said, all of these articles are now flooding out of the Western media. This is from the Wall Street Journal. NATO allies confront serious gap in arms production to counter Russia. This article ties in with the 2024 NATO summit in Washington, D.C. It says, senior US and European leaders opened this week's NATO summit with a pledge to increase the alliance's investment in military industrial production, while acknowledging that more than 2 years after Russia invaded Ukraine, the allies are still struggling to produce enough weapons and equipment to help Kiev win the war. This is what I have been saying all along. I was called a Russian propagandist for saying this. I was put on multiple lists. Some lists are characterized as kill lists. I've been put on these lists by Ukraine, by Ukrainian organizations, by US government-funded organizations for just pointing out this reality that now even NATO is acknowledging at their summit in Washington, D.C. this year. Even as Russian President Vladimir Putin put his country on a war footing, cranking out tanks and ammunition rounds at an alarming rate, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has had limited success in accelerating the output of its own defense industry. The reality is that the war in Ukraine has demonstrated not only that the scopes have been too small and that the production capacity has been delinquent, but it has also demonstrated serious gaps in our interoperability, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said. So how will NATO solve this problem? They admit, Stoltenberg admits that this is their problem. How are they going to solve this? It says, Stoltenberg said the Allies will sign a new defense industrial pledge this week to increase defense spending, better coordinate production among the different countries, and to do more to enforce those promises. So promises, pledges, signing your name on some document, that is not actually how you increase production. I'll explain to you how to increase production. First, what the collective West would need to do is seize all of the private enterprise engaged in arms production, nationalize it, turn them into state-owned enterprises, switch their priority from profit to purpose, the purpose of manufacturing arms and ammunition. Then you would also have to completely rework your entire education system, especially the United States. You'd have to take that from a for-profit model and turn it into a purpose-driven model of actually educating your population with the skills they need to produce the industrial output your country needs to fulfill its domestic and foreign policy objectives. And of course, none of this will ever happen. Even if they were serious about doing this, it would take years and years to actually implement. It will never happen because the very interests benefiting from this for-profit system have seized control of the governmental organizations within the collective West and organizations like NATO itself. The article admits, in the US, defense companies and the Pentagon now say they were overly optimistic about how quickly they could increase production of critical weapons. Supply chain kinks and labor shortages meant it will take 4 years to double output of the US-made Javelin anti-tank missile that Ukraine uses widely, twice as long as initially expected. So we saw Javelin missiles on that assistance package list that I just read off of. I talked about how monthly production is extremely low. I had talked about previously, after the initial stockpiles were sent to Ukraine, that the numbers would drop off and that it would take them years to increase production. They're saying that it's actually double now. So they're saying 4 years, well, it's 2024 right now. So are they talking about 2028? Is that when they're going to be able to increase Javelin missile production? And to what extent will that expansion be? Will it be enough to deal with the amount of armor Russia is able to produce month to month by 2028? That is the question. The answer is almost certainly no, they will not be able to. The problem the collective West has is systemic. It is not a matter of will or money and just mobilizing will and scraping together enough money. They have more than enough of both. They have both in abundance. The problem is the actual ability to manufacture. These corporations that control manufacturing in the United States, across Europe, they are for-profit enterprises. If you give them more money, all they will try to do is find a way to make more profits from it, not produce more. in terms of production, produce more in terms of profit. You would need to change that system first before you get the results that you see Russia and China achieving. They have a for-purpose arms industry. The US and Europe have a for-profit arms industry. You need to change that before you change anything else, before you expect any sort of change in terms of production and meeting your targets. And like I said, this is not going to happen, and I've talked about this extensively. Where else is this fundamental systemic problem inhibiting ultimately what is Washington's proxy war against Russia and Ukraine? What about the F-16s? From Bloomberg, Ukraine's F-16 ambitions snarled by language barrier, runways, and parts. These are all things that I talked about at length. When the first mention of sending F-16s was made, I said to properly train these pilots would probably take a decade to integrate the F-16 into Ukraine's armed forces. It took Romania 10 years to do it under ideal conditions. This is less than ideal. It will take them at least as that long, probably longer. It's probably implausible altogether. And that is finally what Bloomberg and many others are now admitting. This summer, Kiev will finally get the F-16 fighter jets. It's been insisting it needs to repel Russia, but in far fewer numbers than it had hoped. I always said that sending them large numbers of F-16s was impossible, just like transferring huge numbers of Western main battle tanks. It takes a long time to train personnel to operate these systems, to maintain them, to establish the logistics to support them. Ukraine may be able to field a squadron of F-16s, anything from 15 to 24 jets, well short of the 300 its leaders have called for, according to one of the people. Another said Kiev expects to get 6 F-16s this summer and up to 20 by the end of the year. And as I've explained many times before, they will trickle in the number of F-16s. Russia will be destroying them as they come in. They will never build a critical mass of air power, just like they were never able to build a critical mass of artillery or of air defense capabilities or of any of the other capabilities that the West has been transferring over to Ukraine. The challenges have been so severe that they've raised doubts about the wisdom of sending the jets to Ukraine, and whether doing so now amounts to a very costly show of support for President Volodymyr Zelensky. Again, it's all about signaling to the world that the West has staying power in Ukraine when they clearly do not, and Russia is almost certainly going to outlast them. In the months since pilots began training, including 12 in the United States, the battlefield has changed, with both sides relying on cheap drones and Russia bolstering its air defenses, and also Russia using its own military aviation to drop Clyde bombs. Again, it's not about one single weapon system. Because Russia has extremely good and numerous air defense capabilities, because they have electronic warfare capabilities, because they are able to defend their front and also the rear very well, they're able to use their military aviation in ways that Ukraine never will be able to match. And of course, because of their military industrial capacity, they will be able to do so on a scale that Ukraine will never be able to match. Then the article talks about some of the specific problems. It says, first, the planes must be reconfigured depending on their tasks, such as reconnaissance or combat. Second, Ukraine doesn't have many long, high-quality runways required for the F-16s or shelters to protect them from Russian attack, which was an obvious problem they were going to have. The F-16s are being sent because Ukraine's original Air Force has been piecemeal destroyed over the course of this conflict. And all the Soviet-era warplanes from Eastern Europe transferred to Ukraine have been found and destroyed. So if you send F-16s to replace them, the same process will begin with the F-16s that you sent. There's no way to hide them. There's no way to preserve them from Russian attacks. Then it says, third, the logistics of supporting the planes are complex, from the need for spare parts to maintenance demands to finding engineers. Another NATO official noted that Ukraine is trying to achieve in a matter of months what usually takes 3 or 4 years. So again, all of these points that I have been making since they began talking about sending F-16s, the logistics behind it, the maintenance, the length of time it takes to integrate a new warplane into an armed force. We remember all the wonder weapon stories about the F-16s, how they were going to turn the tide, just like the Patriot missile system was, just like HIMARS was, just like all these other weapon systems that were sent, the air-launched cruise missiles, the TACMs. The F-16 hasn't even reached Ukraine yet, and all of the wonder weapon narratives have evaporated. And all that is left is this very disappointing, inevitable reality that these are going to get there, and they will be destroyed one after the other by the next tranche that arrives in Ukraine. The original tranche will already have suffered huge losses. They will never build up critical mass in terms of military aviation. That is just a fact that they are now even admitting. All the F-16s are going to do, just like every other weapon system sent to Ukraine, is draw this out longer. Draw this conflict out longer, get more Ukrainians killed, get more of Ukraine destroyed, bleed Ukraine of more of its territory, and as the inevitable end of this conflict draws near, put Ukraine in an increasingly disadvantageous position when it finally does have to negotiate. But that was the plan all along. There are dated policy papers going all the way back to 2019, RAND corporations extending Russia. The whole point was to expend all of Ukraine for the sake of extending Russia, so that the United States didn't have to pay the full cost of the conflict. Ukraine would pay it for them. They would expend Ukraine, indifferent to its ultimate demise, in the hopes that this conflict would extend Russia and possibly precipitate a Soviet Union-style collapse. But this is not the Cold War. The tables have turned in terms of military, economic, technological power. Those dynamics don't exist. That type of outcome is very unlikely. But that is their plan nonetheless, and they are obviously committed to proceed with it. We have one more article here from the Washington Post. Basic training in Ukraine is barely covering the basics, commanders say. I saw Mark Sloboda post this on his Telegram channel. I include his channel, Scott of Calibrated, and the Duran in the video description below for people to check out. They want daily updates on what's going on in Ukraine. This was actually from June 2nd, 2024. And this is about training in Ukraine. And this is something that I have gone over extensively many times in the past. Now, again, here's the Western media finally admitting to all of this. This is what they talk about. As Ukraine prepares to mobilize tens of thousands of men to address a critical shortage of soldiers amid intensified Russian attacks, Ukrainian commanders in the field say they are bracing for most of the new troops to arrive with poor training. I've talked about this extensively. To create an effective infantryman, you need at least 6 months of training, basic training, and then intense combat training. And then you send them to a military unit that has competent, qualified leadership at all levels, from the fire team to the platoon, to the company, battalion, and the brigade itself. And Ukraine does not have the ability to do any of this. NATO does not have the ability to do any of this. They don't have 6 months to train these soldiers. Ukraine is losing their soldiers so quickly that they are required to send these soldiers through, these conscripts basically, send them through a crash course and get them to the battlefield as quickly as possible. That's how quickly Ukraine is losing manpower at the line of contact. It says, with Ukraine's forces critically understaffed and losing ground, the failure to provide adequate basic training for soldiers underscores the dire situation Kiev is facing more than 2 years after Moscow's invasion. Again, this is something that I have been saying for months, if not years. The prospect of being sent to a dangerous frontline position without adequate training is a main reason many Ukrainian men fear conscription. As part of the recruitment effort, the National Guard's Kataria Brigade has billboards across the country promising 60 days of preparation. 60 days is 2 months. U.S. Marine Corps basic training is 3 months. And even if you're not an infantryman, you still get an additional 1 month of combat training for a total of 4 months of training. And let me tell you, you are still not ready for combat at that point. If you are an infantryman, You get 3 months of basic training. You get another 3 months of very intense infantry combat training. And it is intensive. So a half year of training, not 60 days, 6 months. The article talks about how conscripts can get as few as 20 bullets to practice with before being sent to the front. There are no grenades to practice with. If you are watching the footage coming out of the frontline fighting, grenades play a huge role in trench warfare, something you probably want to be familiar with before going to the front line, before storming an enemy position. And this problem exists precisely because the collective West is incapable of supplying Ukraine with sufficient amounts of arms and ammunition, not even basic things like small arms, ammunition, and hand grenades. What about the quality of the conscripts being forced into service themselves? What does this article say about that? Now, I have seen a lot of stories from pro-Russian media that I don't report because I don't know if it's true or not. They were saying Ukraine is using elderly men. There were some pictures of very old men fighting. This is what the Washington Post says. Some assault brigades might devote personnel to live practically full-time near training centers to quickly snatch up the youngest, fittest, most motivated men. The officer, who was an instructor at a training center, confirmed that some brigades indeed plot for first dibs. If they send us to recruit someone, all the good ones have already been taken by other brigades, and you have to choose from the crooked, lame, sick ones, the sergeant said. So they're admitting that Ukraine is pressing crooked, lame, and sick men into service. That's what they're admitting right there. Some recruits are deemed physically fit despite being over age 50 with knee and back issues, meaning they will struggle to walk miles with a pack of gear and weapons, as is often required. Some brigades are ordered to take those men anyway. We always hear about catastrophic, unsustainable Russian losses, but we don't see any evidence of that on the actual battlefield. We do see evidence of that on the Ukrainian side, and now it is being admitted to by even the Western media, publications like the Washington Post. Now, again, Western politicians do not publicly talk about a theory of victory beyond the most general terms of winning against Russia because there is none. They know that they can't win. They know Ukraine is not going to win. The goal here is not for Ukraine to win. It's to get Ukraine to fight and bleed as long as possible before they collapse, to raise the cost of victory for Russia as high as possible. Again, going back to this idea of overextending Russia and hopefully collapsing it like the collective West believes they did to the Soviet Union. But as I explained, this is not the Cold War. The collective West does not hold a monopoly on industry, on technology, or military power. That now has shifted eastward to Eurasia. They now have these advantages over the collective West. The West has allowed these abilities to atrophy in their pursuit of profit over purpose. They only have one real choice, and that is to abandon the pursuit of hegemony and primacy over the rest of the planet and learn how to coexist with the rest of the planet. But they're not going to do that. The current circle of interests driving collective Western foreign policy are not going to do this. They're going to continue grinding on, and it's up to the rest of the world to keep it in check and to continue the rise of the multipolar world and continue moving it forward, even if the West insists on being left behind. So that is where we are with the conflict in Ukraine. I will continue keeping an eye on this conflict and all other areas of tension as the collective West fights the rise of multipolarism. Until then, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can follow my work. Highly suggest you follow me on Telegram. I post absolutely everything there, including backups of all my videos. I'm also now uploading all of my videos from YouTube onto Rumble. So if you prefer to watch my videos there, that link will be in the video description below if you're not already watching it on Rumble. In the video description below are all of the links that I referenced, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of the platforms that I am on. If commercials pop up, feel free to skip past them. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. To everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or even if you have no extra resources and you're just helping share my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. That is what makes this work possible, so thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.